Okay, let's get started. Okay, so these are the areas I'd like to have a look at today. We will start with meeting etiquette, which I think speaks for itself. We're going to then move on to look at small talk or getting down to business, so really at the beginning of a meeting. Number 3 is chairing. So I'm looking at getting people involved, getting people participating. Number 4 is speaking up, so actually contributing to a meeting. And lastly, I'd like to have a look at avoiding miscommunication. And as usual, I'll do a wrapping up or summary of what we covered today. And as I mentioned, naturally a chance for questions and answers. Okay, number 1, meeting etiquette. Actually, I'd like to start with a short video. So I'm going to play that, all being well. Now it should work. Here we go.
How are you doing? Hey, is that Dara?
Yeah. Hey.
Guys, I can't hear anything.
Oh. Hey, Dara, there's a kind of feedback thing in the back. Maybe you need to mute your phone. The light behind your head, we can't actually see you. Maybe you can adjust that. Marilee, hi, how are you doing, Marilee? Hey, Josh, how are you doing?
Good.
Did you know this meeting was happening right now? Hey,
Look, it's my dog.
It's great you've got that. But we're going to be trying to go through some slides.
Okay.
We were supposed to be going, Josh, through the figures. Have you got the figures? That's better. That's way better, Andrew. Andrew, still a little bit still can't really see. You need to turn it so the light is on your face. That's better. That's better. Great. Dara, I think we've lost you.
Well, hopefully you haven't experienced all of these things at once in a meeting. But I think after 4 years of working online and hybrid, I'm sure by now we kind of know the do's and don'ts when it comes to online meetings. Obviously, we've all experienced that moment where we hear some strange background noises coming from your PC because colleagues have forgotten to mute themselves. And even those of us that maybe might be a bit more alert to muting and unmuting, you'll be caught out at some point and see all your colleagues saying, "You're still on mute." Now, well, obviously, there are also moments where you are prepared and you want to share your screen. Maybe you have a presentation that you want to share, and suddenly you see that you've shared the wrong screen and everyone can see your web shop wish list. So naturally, yeah, these things happen. But I think by now we're more or less all on the same page when it comes to basic meeting etiquette. I would say in a small meeting, it's only really polite and right to have your camera switched on. And when people are presenting and sharing their ideas, really to be engaged and listen. So being prepared is really a no-brainer. You should be checking your tech. You should be thinking about your mic and your camera before you join. And also the background. We have lots of choices now with virtual backgrounds, but think about lighting and how you look on camera. So basically being professional. Okay, so we know these things, but what about the initial moment of starting a meeting? How much time should we actually dedicate to small talk? Well, before I go into that, I'd like to take us back in time. So thankfully, long gone are the days where we had no real contact, at least with colleagues and others. During the pandemic, it was really important to check in with each other before we got on with a meeting. And especially considering the stresses that we were under then, what with working from home full time, perhaps with small children or in an unsuitable working area, and just basically a lot of us feeling lonely and disconnected. Well, one thing, however, that doesn't seem to have changed since then is the amount of meetings that we have jammed into our calendars. So for many of us, it's great that we don't have to travel to work every day and waste time moving from location to location for different meetings, or just in the same building to different meeting rooms. Rather, we can sit behind our laptops and just click a button. But obviously there's a downside to being so efficient, and that is, as I mentioned, that our calendars have become filled with meetings, and sometimes these are actually back to back. And let's be honest about it. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, I wish I could do more meetings today? So just to put this in a bit of perspective, I've got some statistics for you. So this is from Otter AI. They're a Californian-based technology company in the States, obviously. And according to them, they say that 70% of our employers experienced a 70% increase when remote working was introduced. They also said the number of meetings attended by workers on average rose by 13.5%, and that weekly meeting time, increased by 10%, resulting in 3 additional weekly meetings per employee. Now, naturally, that's often different from role or position. Naturally, managers probably have a lot more meetings than, say, other roles, but I think we can agree that most of us have seen a rise in online or meetings. This is obviously this extra pressure of having meetings, and the time constraints on top of that might give you reason to skip small talk and just get on with the meeting agenda. By the way, I'm not including the small talk such as how are you and oh, how was your weekend, which a lot of us ask without really expecting or wanting an answer beyond, yeah, fine, great. So before we move on, I'd like to hear from you. I'm going to actually start a poll because I'm curious to hear about, your thoughts with regards to small talk. So if you just give me a moment, I will set up the poll. Yes, here it is. Okay, so all being well, you'll see some questions. You have to choose the first, the second, or the third. So do you make time for small talk, but only for a minute or so? Do you have small talk for as long as it takes? Or do you never, or let's say rarely, have small talk? So I'll wait for the results to come in, and then we can have a little chat about that. Okay, at the moment I'm seeing most people answering the first one, but it's changing. Nobody said number 3, which is interesting. Okay, allow there's some last people to come in, and while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to scroll down to see if I missed anything in the chat. Oh, I see that a few people are having problems connecting, but hopefully my colleague will help you there getting in. Okay, I'm going to share the results. So we had 79% of you said that you do make time for small talk. Great. And okay, 21% said actually also small talk and for however long it takes. Interesting. Well, actually, there's not really the right answer. However, I want to, look at this in a little bit more detail. So although virtual meetings may feel and look very different to face-to-face meetings, we are all dealing with human beings here. And I think that's the reason for the results that you all try to make some time for small talk. I mean, have you ever walked into a boardroom and just jumped straight into the agenda without offering drinks or, having time for chit-chat and introductions? So in short, the general advice is to try to bring in some of that in-office etiquette into your virtual environment. Say hello properly, make sure that you check in with each other still, ask what you've been up to, and very important, when you're meeting people for the first time especially, make sure you introduce yourselves. Now, that can be sometimes quite difficult, I think, with a bigger meeting with lots of participants involved. It's very difficult to have a natural conversation. So you can try a virtual icebreaker. Here on the screen, you'll see a link. Obviously, I'm not going to go to that link now, but we will share that with you. So check that out if you're involved in bigger meetings with lots of participants. Nice start to a meeting. So up until now, we've been talking about the importance of small talk. And from the poll, I can see that, yeah, everybody's on board with that. They make time for small talk. However, it is also good to point out that different cultures have different approaches to small talk. In fact, regardless of that, whether that's online or offline, yeah, different people have different approaches. And I'd like to illustrate that here by this dialogue. Before we look at the dialogue, I just want to give you some background. So this is a kind of a case study. We have on the one hand, Theo. He is a team lead of a portfolio management team. He works for GIZ, and they're a development agency based in Germany. He's German. And he has a meeting with his team member, Suraj, and Suraj is calling in from Delhi, and he's Indian. So I'd like you just to read the dialogue to yourselves. It's the beginning of a meeting. And then please share your thoughts in the chat. So I'm curious to see what you think's going on here. I'll give you a moment to have a read. Can't hear. I'm not sure why you can't hear. Oh, lovely, David. Thank you for sharing your comments. Neither appreciates the cultural norms of the other. Okay, yeah. Different needs, different expectations of the meeting. Very good point. Absolutely, Lisetta. Oh, I just have to scroll up to make sure I didn't miss that one. He's trying really to connect with Theo. I'd agree. Yeah. Yeah. To have a conversation offline. Absolutely nice. Yeah, indeed. Theo definitely wants to get on with the agenda, and Suraj is yeah, absolutely much more sociable. Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. All really important comments here about the focus on either business or the social aspect. That's definitely the point here. Let's click on further. So as you've all rightly pointed out, there is a clash basically between these two cultures when it comes to their approach to small talk. So on the one hand, we have the German professional culture. We can see this as task-based. And on the other hand, we have the Indian culture, and we can see this as relationship-based. But what do I mean by task-based and relationship-based? Well, these different approaches really can be seen in how important each culture thinks interpersonal relationships are in a professional environment. So on the one hand, a task-based culture like German culture generally focuses on tasks, goals, and outcomes, whereas a relationship-based culture such as the Indians focus more on employee engagement and satisfaction. So it's really important to know the people you work with, what they put the most emphasis on. Is it the work and the project that needs to be done, or is it on the quality of relationships with the people you are working with? Questions you can ask yourself are things like, do I need to get to know each other to be able to work together? And perhaps also, can we separate working life and private life? So, well, let's have a closer look at these differences here. So we could say that a German professional would approach a meeting in the following way. So they are quite punctual, or actually very punctual, not quite. So meetings start on time. They like meetings with an agenda, with a purpose. They often keep their private life and their work life and their private life separate, which means that they don't spend that much time on small talk. On the other side, we have, on the other hand, we have the Indian culture. They have a more flexible approach to time, so meetings can start late. They don't always follow a strict agenda. They find building trust and personal relationships very important, and that translates in having small talk. And even they like to share questions and information about their family. So you can even expect questions about family. Now, this is, of course, a generalization. You should also consider things like company culture, individual preferences. But in short, you really need to think about who is participating in the meeting, especially when you're working with an international team. This is, of course, just one example of different approaches to work relationships. Of course, there are many factors to consider when it comes to different cultures and how they communicate at work. We naturally can't cover that all today. But being aware of the differences and perhaps adjusting the way, for example, you kick off a meeting is a good start. But really, to optimize your intercultural interactions, it is advisable to follow an intercultural training, as there is so much more at play. Also, just one more point I'd like to add here. Communication does come from two ways. So if you are working in an international team, the onus is not just on you to adapt and be aware. So what I mean by that is it's not just you doing all the work, but also the other parties that you're communicating with. So an IC training or intercultural training should involve everybody in those intercultural communications in order to be able to better work together and communicate. Yes, okay. So we have talked a bit about meeting etiquette, so being aware of what you should and shouldn't do when you're online, especially. We've also talked about the importance of small talk, but also bearing in mind that different cultures have different approaches to that. But what about chairing? So perhaps in your role, you might need to chair or lead a meeting. Now, it's completely normal that some people have much more to say and contribute to the meeting than, for example, others. But it's very important not to miss out on contributions from, say, quieter participants. So before we dive into this, again, I'd like to hear from you. I'm going to focus just on virtual meetings because I think that takes quite a lot of our time still up. So tell me what you think some of the reasons are for making it difficult to participate online as opposed to, say, a face-to-face meeting. So this time we'll just do that in the chat. There's no poll. So what makes it harder to stay focused and participate online in a meeting compared to, say, a physical or face-to-face meeting? Oh, I've lost my chat. Where's it gone? Here. There it is. Okay. A noisy surrounding. Being shy. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Voices, yeah. Oh, I saw multitasking. I'm just going to go back to that. Distracted online meeting, yeah, echoes. Yeah, so we've got all the tech problems that can arise, which with a face-to-face meeting you might have if you were just sharing a presentation, but you haven't got any physical problems with communicating that you do have online. Not understanding the technology, yeah, that's definitely a problem. Not seeing body language, absolutely. Big part of our communication is non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication, there we go, yeah. Sorry, staring a long time at the screen. Yeah, wow, we do have so much screen time now, don't we? Yeah, indeed, it doesn't feel real. So I think somebody said there that they don't feel that they can interrupt. Yes, that's a good point, and we're going to have a look at that in a little while. Sometimes it's difficult to understand dialects. Okay, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Different ways of say speaking English with different accents. Well, I think somebody mentioned there that naturally there are lots of distractions when you're online. There are many resources actually online that more or less come up with the same statistics as you can now see on your screen. But basically, most of us at some point are multitasking during a meeting. Now, that could be just checking your email or doing other work tasks or even unrelated tasks. Obviously, you can't get away with this when you're in an actual meeting face to face. Of course, it is impossible to get everybody to give 100% all of the time, even if it's a face-to-face meeting. And as I mentioned before, some people are just way more involved than others. But as a chair, it is your role to try and get everybody to have the floor so that they can say what they want to say, with bearing in mind with time constraints as well. And just generally making sure that not just one or two people are dominating the conversation. Well, one simple technique is to call on people, literally to use some phrases to make sure that others are involved. It can be as simple as you can see here, what do you think? Or if you want to call on someone specific, what would you like to add anything, Anne? To being a bit more broader, does anybody have any strong feelings about, or are we ready to make a decision? So this is one little technique to get people involved. Now, although these phrases are very useful online, offline, in some situations, much more does need to be done. So with an international team, it's also useful to think about why someone isn't contributing. Maybe they actually really want to say something, but there's something else that is stopping them from doing that. Now, again, there could be many reasons for this, but I've chosen this one reason to focus on. And this is the hierarchical distance between, say, one culture and another. You can see that on your screen here. We have a line depicting the hierarchical distance as short. So you see just a few countries there, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark, to somewhere in the middle, Belgium and Luxembourg, to completely the other side, long as cultures such as China, Morocco, and Ukraine. Now, this distance shows how big or small the hierarchical distance is between people in an organization, and basically how they relate to each other and communicate. Obviously, we can include all countries in the world, but I just wanted to give you a few to demonstrate that. What I'm going to have a look at now, though, is more specifically, it's just two. So we're going to have a look at the Dutch culture, the Netherlands, and the Chinese culture, because as you saw, they are complete pole opposites. So we can see that Dutch society is very egalitarian. So they have a short hierarchical distance. Most companies adopt what we call a horizontal structure. So leaders try to see all staff members as equals. By contrast, Chinese society is very hierarchical. People at higher levels shouldn't contradict, people at lower levels shouldn't contradict senior members of staff. And actually this difference in hierarchy can be due to many different things, from age, gender, job, qualifications, and even family background. So we'll dive into this a little bit more. So from a Dutch business perspective, their approach for a meeting could be summed up as being fast and efficient. They are happy to give their opinion and openly disagree, even in front of the boss or other senior members of staff. Everyone is encouraged to participate, and brainstorming sessions are commonplace. Whereas we have the Chinese culture or business culture, which can be seen as top-down. So that means that company-wide decisions are made by leadership at the top, and then the rest of the employees are expected to follow. Differences of opinion are often actually settled outside or before a meeting. And only the person chairing the meeting speaks and is certainly not interrupted. And brainstorming sessions are not so commonplace. So what does this mean for you as a chair, or perhaps you're a team lead of a multicultural team? Well, there are some tips you can think of to consider. First and foremost, if you're at complete opposites on this hierarchical distance, the first thing is to be mindful. So be mindful of hierarchy. Think about who's in the meeting. If there are low-ranking colleagues with high senior members of staff, they will probably feel quite uncomfortable about speaking up and certainly giving criticism about something in front of them. One option is really to allow participants to prepare. So give them time to prepare by telling them what the meeting will be about beforehand. You could tell them what questions you intend to ask, and even that you are planning to call on them for some input is also important. Also, during the meeting, don't expect people to interrupt you while you're speaking. As a chair, you need to invite people to speak. So you can use some of those phrases that we looked at earlier. Furthermore, you really need to think about the way, the tone, the language that you use. So often what you say and sometimes what you don't say. So think about, for example, how direct you might come across. Try to avoid things like, do you agree? Or for example, yeah, do you agree with the plan to shut the office in Utrecht? Perhaps try to use more open questions like, how do you feel about shutting the office in Utrecht? Or what do you think about? But don't assume that a yes answer means a yes. Ask lots of clarifying questions to check that you're on the same page and that you really understand each other. And we'll come back to those, we'll come back to clarifying language a bit later on. If you do want people to brainstorm, get individuals to do that without a senior member of staff. So they will feel much happier and freer to share their ideas if there's not a higher ranking person in the room. And lastly, if you do want to get criticism from them or discuss a problem, consider a one-to-one meeting. Okay, so it may actually be that you're the person who wants to contribute, but for whatever reason you can't speak up. Again, there may be many reasons for this. These are just a couple that I've thought of. Yeah, here they are. It could be that you don't have the language skills to say what you want to say quickly and concisely enough. It could be that you're not asked to contribute. Perhaps even you're quite an introvert person. You don't feel comfortable speaking up in front of others. Or it could be that somebody is just talking all the time and you just can't get a word in edgeways. Well, if any of all of the above apply to you, there are steps you can take. Preparation is key. But of course, if you really feel you don't have the language skills to participate, push for training. After all, this is an investment not just for you, but also for your company. So both parties will benefit from that. In the meantime, though, as I say, you can prepare a little bit. And I'm not just talking about preparing what you want to say, if you need to share some figures or facts in a presentation, but also prepare for different situations in a meeting that might come up. Yes. Okay, so on the left-hand side, you can see some examples of different situations that might occur in a meeting, 1 to 5. So, for example, you may want to interrupt somebody. You have a good idea, or you want to, bring something up, and you want to interrupt somebody speaking. Or maybe you need to deal with interruption. So maybe somebody interrupts you when you're in full flow, and you need to deal with that. Perhaps you just want to suggest an idea. Number 4, perhaps you need more time to think. So maybe you're in full flow and suddenly, especially if you're speaking in a second language, you can't think of the word or phrase that you need. And lastly, you just want to give your opinion. On the right-hand side, you can see A to E. There are just short phrases there that are supposed to fit or match to 1 to 5, but they're in the wrong order. So I'd like you to try and match them now. A little quiz You can note it down, you can share it in the chat if you like. So see if you can match the functions on the left to the phrases on the right. Another few seconds to try to figure it out. Okay. I'm going to give you the answers. Perhaps you did it quickly. Perhaps you're still thinking, but here are the answers. Yeah, here are the answers. Okay. Well, it's really worth having some of these phrases ready to go. You can either note them down or, yeah, actually, after you've used them a couple of times, you should be able to remember them. So very quickly, you could interrupt by saying, could I just come in here? Dealing with an interruption, perhaps you could say, if I could just finish what I was saying. Suggesting an idea can be as simple as, why don't we? Number 4 is actually quite a good one. I think a lot of us have this problem at some point when we're speaking, that we need more time to think. You could say, so, well, basically, what I would do in that situation is, and then off you go, and giving your opinion. Well, there's lots of ways to do this. I think, I believe, etc., or in my opinion, for example. Maybe you just zoom in on number 4. So as I say, I'm sure we've all come across this problem at some point. Another technique, if somebody's asked you a question, is to repeat the question back to them to give yourselves more time to think. So you could say, for example, so you're asking me if I had any suggestions. Well, and then off you go. You could also just say, yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes it's just a couple of milliseconds that you need. Okay, well, that brings us to our final point today, and that is avoiding miscommunication. Now, of course, miscommunication can happen in many different work situations, between colleagues, with a client. It can happen in writing, in an email. It can happen in a meeting, spoken. Obviously, we're just going to stick to avoiding miscommunication in meetings at the moment. And miscommunications can, again, happen for many different reasons. It could be, again, your language proficiency, so your level of language, or the other parties. Perhaps they're using words you don't understand. Someone mentioned earlier, accents. It could be that they're talking too fast. Multiple reasons. But what I'd like to have a look at is also a cultural aspect that could be at play. So there might be this as a reason for why communication is, not working very well. So miscommunication. So this is just a bit of a funny example here. We have the British, what they say on the left-hand side, what people from other nationalities or cultures might think that they mean, and on the right-hand side, what they actually mean. Let's have a quick look. So you might hear somebody say in Britain, or a British person, yeah, I hear what you say. And you might think that they mean, well, they accept my point of view. They're on board. And actually what they mean is, no, I totally disagree, and I don't want to discuss this any further. Yeah, this is maybe quite a formal way of speaking, but you might hear somebody say, with the greatest respect. A person might perceive or understand that as saying, they're listening to me. And actually they're thinking, I don't really respect you. I think you're stupid. That's quite severe, but still. We also have, I almost agree. So they might think, yeah, they're not far from agreement. And actually they're thinking, no, I don't agree at all. I'll just skip down to the last one. Very interesting. This is the difficult one. I use it a lot when I really am interested, but also when I'm not so interested. So this is hard. Yeah, you might think, wow, they are impressed with what I'm saying and they're interested, but actually they might be a bit bored. I think you're talking rubbish. So yeah, difficult with the different cultures here. Okay, well, there are many phrases to use when it comes to checking understanding, but maybe it's also good to keep in mind the words that you use. So I have some more examples of phrases that might be useful. But before we do that, perhaps it's useful to actually think of, again, the function of clarifying, because there's lots of different ways and reasons we need to clarify, as we just looked at. So one reason is just to check in, to check that everybody has understood what is said and is agreed on. One reason might be for repetition. We were talking earlier about tech problems and things like that, especially online. You might literally not hear them because of sound issues. So you just want them to repeat what they've said. You could want to ask for clarification because you simply don't understand the message for whatever reason, cultural or language proficiency. Or, and I'm sure this has happened to most of us, you might need to rephrase what you've said because they don't understand you. And often you see that in their facial expression. They sort of pull a strange face. You think, oh, yeah, they don't understand. Well, let's have a little look. These are ways of being tactful and polite. So saying something like, I don't understand, that could be perceived as that's the problem from the receiver and not from you. And obviously, we spoke about it's both parties' responsibility to communicate. So nobody's at fault when one person doesn't understand. So a tactful and polite way of dealing with this could be something like, let's just go over that. Let's just go over what we've agreed on again. So everybody's up to date. And then to summarize. And if you see that people maybe have some doubts, you might want to say, well, what areas do you still have questions about? Nice open question. Asking for repetition, it could be as simple as, sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Or can you say it again, please? Just a note here, if you do use these, the likelihood is that the person will repeat exactly what they've said. So only use this when you really didn't hear them. Ask for clarification when you don't understand the message. If sometimes you kind of half understand and you need to double check. So you could say, just to be clear, you're saying, and then repeat what you think you've understood. Or if you're really confused, you could say, yeah, sorry, I don't quite follow you. Could you go over that again, please? And lastly, those times where, as I said before, somebody clearly doesn't understand you, you might want to say, okay, well, to put it another way, or yeah, maybe that wasn't very clear. Let me just clarify that for you. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the webinar. But before we finish off, I'd like to just summarize what we looked at today. So we started off with meeting etiquette, which I think most of us know, but good to remind ourselves of. So yeah, be prepared, check your tech, your mic, your camera, think about your background as well. While people are talking, try to be engaged, especially online, when people are presenting or speaking, and turn your camera on, and obviously mute when you're not speaking. Number 2. In general, do try and make time for small talk, which we found out today all of you do. Try to bring some of that in-office etiquette into your online environment. And if you have a large group, really think about, especially if you're chairing, using an icebreaker to get everybody feeling comfortable and connecting. But of course, consider the fact that cultures have different approaches to small talk. So be prepared to adjust if and when needed. Number 3, chairing. Ask for input and opinions by using some useful phrases. This really ensures that everybody contributes and everybody gets to say what they need to say. You don't want to miss out on some really important contributions for some members of staff that are quieter. But do think about cultural backgrounds, especially when you're working in an international team. There may be lots of different reasons for them not contributing. as we looked at today, one of them could be the hierarchical distance, that they don't feel comfortable speaking in front of other members of staff, particularly senior members of staff. And also think about the language you're using. So where needed, adjust your tone. Perhaps you have quite a direct communication style that can be perceived as, difficult or even rude from some cultures. Again, both parties should be aware of this, not just you. But if you did want to find out a bit more about that in adjusting your tone, you could check out an older webinar I did called Business English for Multicultural Settings, and you can find that on YouTube on Language Partners channel. We also talked about speaking out, so you contributing and again using and learning some phrases is a great way to prepare. But as I mentioned before, if you feel that you're missing the skills, whether that's language or culture, do really consider a training to help you. And in the meantime, learn some phrases to help you interrupt, share your ideas, give opinion, etc. And lastly, clarifying phrases. Try to avoid miscommunication. It's better to check, double check and check again than go away with the completely wrong message. And that can cause multiple problems, as I'm sure we all know. We will do some questions, but before we do, well, first of all, thank you for joining. Just to say, we will share some tips from the webinar with the link to the icebreakers. The icebreakers. You should have that either today, this afternoon, or tomorrow. And if you are interested in a language or intercultural training, you can just reply to the email that you receive.